Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. What's our energy today?
I'm not sure.
That's exactly what it is.
I think I just need to say it now. I'm in chaos at home because I am packing everything up. But by the time this episode comes out, I will be in New York.
Yeah.
So
Yay.
And if you're in New York and you want to come and hang out with us on the 6th of May.
That wasn't even planned, guys.
No, check out the link below. That's if there's any tickets left by the time it went out, because I think about 2/3 of the tickets are gone now.
Yep.
At time of recording. Okay. We're going to talk about loving food. Loving food too much.
Too much. Or so much.
If I had asked you this question, or if you'd thought about this when you were struggling with food, would it have resonated with you that part of the reason or part of the issue around food was about liking it too much or loving it too much?
Yes. So it's interesting because this topic itself strikes me as, yes, I still do. You know, like I didn't have to stop loving food in order to recover. And I think that's maybe where I think I always assumed that was the problem, but I don't think it is anymore because I still love food. I get a lot of joy from food. I'm like a foodie in some ways. I love new restaurants and all different kinds of cuisines. That remains. But I suppose it would have been a pathology that was the reason that I couldn't stop eating it. And I don't think that is the case.
I don't think I would have ever used the term that I loved food too much because I felt so annoyed and pissed off with food. And the word just wouldn't have made sense. I wanted it too much. I desired it too much, but I hated the fact that I did. So for me to have talked about food with sort of the reverence and the love that some people do, I don't think would have resonated me. But one of the reasons why I suggested doing this episode is because there are people who I meet who will say, I don't restrict, so I don't relate to that side of the conversation around compulsive eating or out of control eating. They'll say that I think the reason why I overeat is just because I love food so much.
Well, I sometimes people will say too, I wish that I could just not have to deal with food. It would make things so much easier. And whenever I would hear something like that, or still when I hear something like that, I'm like, no way. Like, absolutely not. That would take away so much joy. I can understand. And I think I have had that thought as far as what it invites and the whole mental gymnastics that go on around food. It's like, it would be so much easier if I didn't have to. But then there's a part of me that's like, no, that would mean that I couldn't eat it. I've had clients say, I wish I could just take a pill and my needs would be met. And I'm like, yeah, but then you don't get to eat. It's like the Jetsons. Did you ever watch the Jetsons when you were young? Was that might have been just before your time, but
I don't think it was really here in the UK. I've only ever heard of it spoken about by Americans.
Oh, you didn't get to see. Okay, well, in that show is takes place in the future, and George Jetson wakes up in the morning. A machine puts his clothes on and gives him his briefcase, and he takes this pill. He swallows it, and I think he says something like, French toast and bacon. And even then as a kid, I remember being like, yeah, but then you don't get to eat the French toast and bacon. Like, it's part of the experience. And so it's interesting that we're coming at this from different places. I admire you for wanting to talk about, I feel like it's difficult to talk about things that I don't actually relate to.
I think it's just because it comes up so much. And this will be the subset of people who will say that they don't necessarily feel that guilty about overeating. And they'll listen to other people who are, they fall into a shame hole with what they're eating. They're saying, I don't really feel guilty about it. What I feel bad about is that I'm gaining weight or that I think it's affecting my health. These are the people who will say, if I could eat whatever I wanted and it never negatively affect my health or affect my weight, then that's what I would want. And that wouldn't have been me. If I could have taken something that would have got rid of my desire to eat, that's what I would have preferred, because I didn't want to want it. So I think a big part of my journey was actually making peace with my appetite and the fact that I have an appetite and appreciating my appetite and respecting it as well.
Well, do you feel like you relate to joy from food itself?
I do now, yes.
Okay.
But I can only feel that because the guilt and the conflict has gone. If the guilt and the conflict's there, I would rather have just got rid of food completely. I don't want to have to deal with it if
Mm.
those feelings are going to come with it as well.
Well, I feel like the idea of loving food so much comes partially from the experience of eating it. And part of that could be like, although this is probably less common, but the togetherness of it. It can be such a communal thing. It can be um, such a relaxing thing. But it also to me feels related to the concept of I don't get joy from anything else or as much joy. Like I would rather eat food than do the laundry list of other self-care tasks that are suggested. It's interesting because I've been watching The Crown. You watch that? Did we
Mm-mm.
talk about this? Oh, it's good. I like it. I never had any knowledge of the royal family. Anyway, we've been watching it. And typically at night, after the kids go to bed, Mike and I will watch a show, whatever the show is. And it's one episode. And I am always really excited it's a highlight of my day. And I was thinking about how somebody asked me, do you still get happy or excited about things in the same way that you got excited about a binge? And I kind of thought to myself about this, and I was saying, yeah, I'm really genuinely almost like giddy sometimes about like, yeah, the kids are going to go to bed and we're going to watch The Crown. Yeah, because very excited about it. In the same way that I suppose that like I used to look forward to a binge or eating itself or just the idea of food. But at the time when I was eating or binging, I couldn't have looked at them the same. To me, it would have sounded really disappointing to hear that a show, that's what's going to be. That no, like that doesn't compare to food. Whereas now it feels like that is something that holds a candle to food because it's part of a more regulated experience. Like it's something that brings me joy in a way that I don't know it would have if I was still binging because food is so compelling and it has so much more opportunity for rewards from a chemical level, right? That I don't know that a TV show is actually providing. But when the food regulated, it gave me more room to explore other things that brought me that quieter quality of joy, not so much that big giant hit. Like a binge there was such an energy charge to it. It was almost like a high, and then it was a low, but it was almost this extreme. Whereas watching a show feels a lot more regulated. It doesn't feel like a big hit of something. It's still happy to me. But I think that as food regulates and you don't need those as high highs and you don't hit as low lows, all other things start to equalize. So now I feel like food is something I look forward to, and I absolutely very much enjoy a good meal. But I also very much enjoy watching a show afterwards, and to me, they're almost the same at this point.
And there's a similarity as well with binging, that there's this window of opportunity for your show. If your time was yours to do with whatever you wanted and you could watch The Crown as many episodes as you wanted, whenever you wanted, it wouldn't have, I
Mm,
imagine, that same sense of anticipation and looking forward to. And that brings in a different level of enjoyment.
you're absolutely right. There's something like, yeah, I get to now.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have applied this before, you know what I mean? Because I tried. I think I used to be like, okay, what's another thing that I would like I wanted to replace the binge with something, but nothing was as appetizing, no pun intended, but nothing was as appetizing to me as food would have been. So I guess the question becomes, how is that? Like, why does that shift? How does that shift? Because I think it does shift. And that's kind of the message that I feel like I couldn't have understood that at one time either. I wouldn't have felt like it compared. It would have almost seemed disappointing. Like, I don't want a show to be my high. But somehow it has shifted. And I didn't have to try. I didn't have to replace a binge with a show on purpose. It just sort of organically amounted to the same level of joy.
Well, for me, as someone who's lived the ups and downs through food as well, it was like when the lows became less low, the highs became less high.
Yeah.
So when I was reducing the catastrophization and the judgment around binging, I wasn't crashing into as deep a shame hole and despair hole than previously. So because I wasn't sinking as low and because it wasn't as terrible to eat in this way at times, the buzz from getting it right and doing it well, or even just the break of freedom of a binge, tended to reduce as well. And I think sometimes that's why people are reluctant, maybe not consciously, to not experience the lows, because to level off the lows means leveling off the highs as well.
Yeah, right.
And so
Exactly.
there's a cost to that. There's a reward on one hand and there's a cost. And it brings you into that more meh middle ground.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. What I'm trying to argue, I think, is that the meh middle ground doesn't feel meh when all else is stable. It only feels meh when you're used to highs and lows, right? Like that, the chaos hormone is somewhat addicting. And so the idea of the middle is sort of boring. And there's something in this that you had spoken, I think it was on the Facebook group for the community about the book that and I haven't read the book, it's on my list, but could you maybe speak to it? The Dopamine Nation and the effect of dopamine on this process.
Yes. I could
Feel like
think
I'm
of which
interviewing you.
I was thinking kind of which part, and specifically to loving food, there
Mm,
is, I mean, dopamine, we often think of it to do with pleasure, but it's also it's a hormone and a neurotransmitter. So sometimes just the pursuit of the thing itself can be rewarding. And then sometimes the pursuit is more rewarding than getting the thing. You know, we're talking about this today in the community as well, how sometimes you can get your food in sort of this frenzy compulsive state, and then the desire for it diminishes. Either when you're already in the supermarket, or sometimes for me, I'd get the food home and then I'd be thinking, I don't actually want it. Or I'd order it on my phone and then I would think, I don't actually want it, but now that it's coming, I'm going to have it anyway.
well, did you speak to something about the highs and the lows, like the extreme highs and lows? Or maybe you mentioned the book and this concept came into my mind. Maybe you didn't talk about it. Maybe I just was like, "Oh, that might be interesting to look at it from that lens." Well, here was my thought around it. And you can maybe correct me because I didn't read the book, so I'm not quite sure. But my thought is that when we love food and when food becomes our vehicle of expression and joy and all these things, right? And if it turns into disorder, we start to crowd out other sources of dopamine because then we might feel more shame, or we don't want to go out anymore. We gain weight, and then we're not socializing as much, and we're basically making food the source of dopamine. So then now there's so much energy attached to the food that it's responsible for so much for all of our joy almost. And so the hits are hard. They're high and fast, and the absence of food is really low. So it's almost like we concentrate the dopamine experience through food alone, and therefore I feel like the swings will be higher and the swings will be lower. When we have more sources of dopamine, though I would expect that the hits from food are still a hit, but not quite as high because it's not all concentrated in food anymore. Maybe we're having more social enjoyment or watching shows, and that's providing. So there's more leveling out. Does that make sense? Is it according to the book?
Well, thinking about it from my perspective, when I was in the chaos with food, I couldn't find pleasure in anything else. I wasn't interested. And I don't think that was like, I don't know if dopamine's necessarily responsible for that. I think a big part of that came about from how I felt about myself, from constantly experiencing the shame, the frustration, the fear. There was so much fear around feeling so out of control around food. So I don't know what the relationship is between dopamine and fear.
Mm,
And I guess that's why thinking about it in those terms, there might be something in it, but I don't know that that really resonates to my experience
yeah.
so much. I can remember in certain situations, the absence of food was so painful. Like if I was at home feeling really low, empty time, I think that I've spoken about before, the absence of not filling that with food in that moment would have just been too painful to have done. We're talking about these very sort of highs and lows with food. When I was thinking about this as a subject for the podcast, I was actually thinking more about the people who will say, well, since I was a kid, I just loved food and I ate a lot. And yes, I
Mm,
got judged for eating a lot. And maybe I got judged for my size, even though I look back now and realize that I was absolutely fine. There was nothing wrong. And that's kind of continued. So it's not so much a high and a low. It's just eating what somebody might think is more than they quote unquote need.
mm,
It's hard to find the right language for, because they love food as much as they do. And they'll say, I don't think it's emotional. I don't think I
yeah.
eat for emotional reasons. I think it's just because I really like it. And then I think there's a provocative question that you could put out there, which would be along the lines of, um, is it that you really love the food, or is there a fear of how you'll feel without it? Because for me, in those moments, in that empty time with how I was feeling at that time, to not have the food to fill it, it doesn't make sense when I say it now. It doesn't stand up to rational scrutiny, but it was somehow scary.
Yeah. Well, that's like we were talking about, when you're in the middle of a binge urge and realize that the urge has diminished. And somebody had asked the question, "What do you do in a time like that?" Because I almost feel like this compulsion to keep going. And my thoughts around that was, because then what? You know what I mean? Like, without it, what? But also, I'm thinking about people who grew up just loving. I did. It must be a spectrum of relating to this, but I always had the heartiest appetite out of my siblings. Like, I could eat more. I still have a really hearty appetite. And I could understand, like, I have a friend, we go out to dinner, and we go out with a group of friends, and my friend and I both are the ones who are like, we're always like, "Can't understand the people who leave food on their plates." Not from at one point, it was from a binge the disordered perspective, but even still, it's kinda like, when I'm at a restaurant and it's really good food, I could absolutely finish the plate. I could. I don't always, though, and I think it's, what's the difference there? Like, there is some part of me that so much likes it, and I don't get full quickly. So it's like I could eat it all. And sometimes, a lot of times I do. But there's sometimes also, like, I suppose, other factors that come in that cue me to stop. But it's not necessarily because I don't enjoy it anymore. It's not even like it feels like it's diminishing returns. It still tastes just as good, but there's other reasons that come in. And I suppose part of the reasons I would stop now have to do more with thought and um, predicting and using parts of my brain that have other considerations going on versus just that immediate sort of, this is a pleasurable experience. I just want to be inside of that pleasurable experience.
That I don't know if there wasn't a diminishing returns going on as I was eating and there was more food left. I don't know if I could stop myself.
Mm,
Because that, to me, what it makes me think of, I don't know you're necessarily saying this, is it makes me think of that feeling of not being able to find satisfaction that was so a part of the compulsive eating. And there will be times when I will have a meal somewhere and I'll be eating it and there's still food left, but I'm kind of full, but I'm not quite feeling satisfied. And there's still this uncomfortable desire to finish the food. And I can, so sometimes I can leave food on a plate, but it comes from how I feel. I
mm.
don't know that it really comes from thought very often.
So, some intuitive eaters, quote unquote, will say, like, that there's just a sensation of fullness or satiation. And it's just, I don't want any more. Like, and that somehow that intuition just shows up after we recover. And I guess that happens sometimes. I have access to that sometimes. But I would say that at least 50% of the time, what's going on is more like, it's not, I don't know how many percent, but there's definitely times where I could keep eating. It's not that I'm not satisfied. It's just, I could just keep eating. But I just know that I might feel a sense of fullness coming on, or I know that is coming. So it's kind of like, okay, I could stop now because I know that I'm actually full. Um, but there's still some part, and I'm careful to talk about this in parts because it's not the entirety of me, but there is a part of me that could happily keep eating too,
Mm.
But it's kind of like, then I'm going to end up overfull, and I just know that. So that there is some thought involved.
Yes. No, agreed. It's not that I'm losing thought, but I guess the thought is based on a feeling as well.
Mm.
Because it might be like, okay, I feel myself filling up, and the thought will be, it tastes really good. You could keep going, but how are you going to feel?
Do you know what it is in the part where you were talking about that the question being, what about the absence of it? Is it more a fear of not having it? I think that's what it is. It's like there's less of a fear of not of stopping doesn't feel as fearful. So as long as there's no fear of stopping, I can. I think that was the difference before, where there was more of a fear of stopping.
That makes sense. And of course, I think this is often the cliched response when people say they love food too much, is to ask, how often are you actually paying attention to the food? You say you love the food so much. So for me, certainly when I was in a compulsive eating place, there was something in the experience that was very rewarding, but I wasn't paying any attention to the food.
Mm.
and it was giving me a kind of feeling. So therefore, it wasn't about loving any particular food. It was chasing some relief from something, from an itch that I was struggling to scratch. And of course, it was often mixed with a screen as well. So then the question that how I might talk about it with somebody, is it about loving the food, or is it an experience of
Yeah.
a screen and food, or some kind of splitting in food?
Or even comfort, like sometimes sitting down to, as you were talking just then, I was thinking of what food do I love so much? And it's like a big bowl of spaghetti, love, love, love. And there's something about the experience of it, which is I always love to have my spaghetti in a bowl. And that's part of the experience of it because it's like this vessel. It's like this, I don't know why eating out of a bowl is so much more fun than off of a plate, but it is. And I sort of like imagine sitting down, and I am often distracted with food as well. Like there's something about the comfort of that whole experience, and that's part of what I don't wanna leave. Um, that I think food used to represent that whole experience. But why might it be difficult? I suppose it depends on who we're talking to. Like, does it feel like just simply, "I'm just so happy to be here with my spaghetti that I just wanna keep eating the spaghetti," or is it that if I you could take it or leave it, you know what I mean? Like, it's how much energy charges around the spaghetti and stopping eating the spaghetti, or what would the reasons for stopping be?
Well, I guess some of the things you were saying, it's about one, maybe there's an anticipation of how you're going to feel afterwards. There's also an anticipation of what's happening next. So if it's lunchtime and you're going to be going out, or you've got a big dinner coming, that might then impact how much or at what point I would choose to stop eating.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that there is a place for loving food and feeling like I could eat more, I'd be happy to eat more, and still being able to stop and not have that be a problem. When it's really just about loving food. I think it's different if we're adding in the factors of like there's something else attached to eating that food that's the issue.
Yeah. And there'll be people listening to this who's going, what? That sounds crazy. Like, how does that even happen? And of course, I mean, permission is going to be a big part of it. Like you say, if you know that you can have this again later, or you can have it tomorrow, or you're allowed this food whenever you fancy it, then it is easier to stop. Whereas if you're always planning, even just planning the next diet, and even if you never get to it, it's this small window. You have to eat as much as you can now. And that's why I think as well, perhaps in restaurants and in certain situations, I might be more primed to eat more than I would at home, because it does feel like if I don't have this now, I don't know when I'm going to have the chance to have this again.
Yeah. The difference for me is satisfaction actually, because I think that when I was eating spaghetti, I'm gonna use it, spaghetti before, I was feeling badly about it because it was carbs and it was like I wasn't supposed, and so there was some judgment happening, so it felt it I couldn't I don't think that you could feel satisfied if you've got guilt going on. So, as long as I had that guilt in the background, there was no chance for satiation. Later in recovery, as I started to eat foods, in that year on purpose without guilt, that allowed satiation to happen. And then I could understand what that meant and what that meant about stopping. Like suddenly it wasn't so hard. I think that how do you do that piece is something I would have said for 25 years. Like how could you be okay with stopping? But that's because there was no sense of satiation ever because everything felt like a last supper to some degree, or even if I knew it wasn't the last supper, even if it was something I had every day knowingly, there was a judgment. And as long as that judgment there, I think it blocks your ability to feel, because satiation requires relaxation. It requires some sense of calm and safety. And if you're feeling like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, or like I shouldn't be, or how much is this? Is your then you've got a different energy. You've got your primal brain going on, and the primal brain can't relax enough to feel satisfied.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
I enjoy food now more than I ever have, I think. Even before struggling with disordered eating, certainly more than during, because there's a newfound appreciation for it. And so for the benefit of the listeners, Steph and I are recording this after the clocks changed in the US, but they hadn't changed in the UK. So Steph was sitting here waiting for me. And as far as I was concerned, it was 1 o'clock. And as far as Steph was concerned, it was 2 o'clock here. So this morning, because I'm moving, one of the things I decided to do was to go to Ollie and Steen to use up my points, my loyalty points, because I don't know when I'm going to have a chance to do that again, because I'm going to be
What's
away
Ollie
for a
and
couple of
Steen?
months. That's the cinnamon slice place.
Oh,
So it's a bakery for anybody who doesn't know Ollie and Steen. And I got a banana muffin. And I thought, right, about half an hour before the podcast, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to have a cup of coffee, and I'm going to have the banana muffin. And of course, I get a message from Steph saying, hi, I'm here. And I'm like, where is she?
Oh.
And so I had a moment of, oh, what about my muffin?
Yeah.
I was like, do I eat the muffin quickly now or do I wait? And I decided to wait because I really, really want to enjoy my muffin. Whereas that would have felt, it's okay. That would have felt impossible before to have waited. It would have been, I have to, in fact, it wouldn't have mattered about whether I was recording. I probably would have been eating it on the way back from the bakery.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But now there's a desire to want to love food more and enjoy the experience. But what do you make of the concept of taste hunger? So, they talk about different types of hunger.
Yeah.
And if somebody is saying that I just have a lot of taste hunger that doesn't seem to ever be satisfied.
That is kind of how I think about this episode. And what all the ways I've been talking is sort of around the concept of taste hunger. Like something will continue to taste really good to me. And for that taste hunger doesn't necessarily diminish, but the other hungers might. So taste hunger to me is feeling like you want something for that moment of eating it. Like it's just tastes so good. Which, yeah, some people will say like, oh, after several bites, it got too sweet, and then I didn't want any more, which it just doesn't happen really for me. I'm like, I could sometimes, but not really.
Not too sweet. I don't associate that. I think things can taste not as good, but when people talk about something being too sickly and it's just too sweet to have too much, I'm like, shut up. What are you talking about?
Yeah, like I could eat a whole lot of donuts from taste hunger. Absolutely. But I wouldn't necessarily because of the other kinds of factors. And I think that taste hunger is I like thinking of things in parts. I've been thinking about things in parts a lot lately. And to me, taste hunger is a part that is hard for me to shut off, but that doesn't mean it's all the factors. And that's why I don't end up binging. Well, it's one of the reasons. But the taste hunger still can be there.
I noticed that coming up, and I don't know if you'd call it taste hunger, but if I have a meal that's all the same flavor, like a bowl of soup or even a pasta dish where everything's mixed in, so every bite tastes the same. Even if it tastes really good, I tend to find afterwards I want a different taste.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that might be a dessert, and sometimes it might genuinely be a piece of fruit or something like that. But I there's something about variation.
Yes.
And that was a big part as well, I think, of my binges was this variation.
Yes, definitely.
Of different things.
I call those palate rounders. Because after I have it could be the most delectable meal with lots of, but then it's like, but now I need the crunchy and juicy or something like that. You know what I mean? And I try to round out my meals with something different. I do that generally with all of my meals. I need something else afterwards that didn't quite hit in the meal. That's the art of culinary work, because when I used to watch Top Chef all the time, I don't know if you have that over there, probably. Like the greatest chefs were the ones who knew exactly how to put all the different elements of taste and satisfaction on a plate somehow. I don't know. Maybe if I'd had a Top Chef meal every day, I would be like, I don't need any more palate rounders. You've rounded everything out. Sometimes I thought that was psychological too. Needing that something extra afterwards. Golf clients say to me that it's very difficult to know where a meal's ending and a binge is beginning, because they will have that sense of, I finished this thing and now I need something else. And then after they have that thing, like, well, now I need this. to
Mhm.
it's like, oh, it can keep going. At what point are we satiated? And at what point is this a matter of the psychological need or seekingness?
Well, I think we're probably wired to seek out variety because
Yeah.
that would be important in terms of being able to find all the nutrients that we would have needed. And I can remember it was like a diet culture message where they would say, eat a meal that's the same flavor because then you'll feel satisfied quicker and you'll feel fuller quicker. And I look at that now and I'm thinking, that's not satisfaction. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you'll get enough of the thing and you'll be like, okay, I've had enough of the thing. But it certainly for me anyway, it didn't then mean that I didn't want to go on to eat other things. So sometimes one of my favorite kinds of lunches or even breakfast is a little platter with lots of
Yeah.
different things on it. I love that.
Yes.
I love the variety of that.
Yes.
And maybe I don't know if this would be helpful for people to consciously put more variety in. Could that be part of it for some people?
In the gentle nutrition course I run, we have a week where we talk about. I have a list of all the different adjectives and like chewy, doughy, dense, light, airy, crunchy, sweet, da, 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 da. Because sometimes looking at a list like that, you're like, oh yeah, I do want something doughy. You know what I mean? Like I do want that. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that necessarily to try to experiment with all the different types of food consistencies or temperatures or this or that. Because I think there was a time where I discovered hummus. Not that I discovered hummus, but I discovered
I was
hummus
gonna
as
say.
a no. Like I realized that having I think it was with the turkey sandwich because I used to have a turkey sandwich for lunch. And it was the turkey, the mustard or mayo, or sometimes olive oil with salt, pepper, garlic, and onion, lettuce, a tomato, cheese, and the bread, right? And I discovered that having some hummus to dip it in totally changed. It was like, now I'm done. Now I feel satisfied. It was just this element of the dip sometimes or the creaminess on top, but on top of the bread, not inside of it. So it was like it had to be dipped. Just the way that that came together for me was like, that's it. That's the palate rounder. And just that one little addition would make a difference for me. And I still think about that when I feel like about something like what is the extra element that might round this whole thing out.
Slightly tangential, but I was just thinking about there's that idea that the task is to become more indifferent to food. So the amount of times I hear someone say, I just want to be able to take food or leave it, or I just want to see food as fuel. And that was, I think, me for the longest time. I certainly didn't see the logic in trying to increase my pleasure around food because I thought that that was the problem.
I think what you're saying is absolutely right on. What?
I don't know.
No, I think that that was a brill. In fact, in my head as you were talking, I was thinking, I want that to be the clip for the reel
And
because
then I
it's
went
so
and blew it.
true.
Oh.
It's no, it's to me it feels like the opposite almost by increasing the pleasure we feel, the permission to have pleasure around food. I think it's actually this counterintuitive. It's helpful. It's actually leads more to the satisfaction. Again, that's why I began the episode by saying I consider myself recovered or, like I don't binge anymore. I don't feel an issue with that, but I still love food and that feels fine. Like it's not a problem. It's actually great. I love loving food. I don't need to be completely neutral about take or leave it. No way. Like I look forward to my meals most days. I occasionally will have indifference, but mostly it's difference. That doesn't make sense.
I know. What's the opposite to indifference? I mean, it can't be difference. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's a silly word.
That's a silly word. If I have a day where I'm more grazy around food, and that's likely to be more hormonal hunger, I find that there's much less pleasure in food around than when I have, I want to say gaps, but it's not this case of, oh, I have to have these gaps between food and I'm telling myself I need to leave X amount of hours. It's not like that. But I think by focusing on increasing my enjoyment of food, sometimes that's the thing that makes me go, not now, is actually
Yeah.
because I want to increase the like with the banana muffin. It's just a not now
Yeah.
because I want to enjoy food. And before I didn't because I thought it was just going to stoke my appetite even more if I
Right.
enjoyed food,
Right.
if I really let myself do that.
Right. But you have to ask yourself how much scarcity is also. I think it's more an issue of scarcity than loving food, right? Like it's when you love food and there's scarcity around it, that's the formula that seems to, for me, that was where it was stuck. Loving food itself or liking food itself was not is fine now.
But there can be a certain, and maybe this like links into the dopamine chasing a bit. There can be a certain mindset or cycle of thinking that more is always better.
Right.
I can certainly do that with lots of things, and I think I've spoken about this before. If I'm enjoying something, I want to carry on doing it until it's no longer fun, and that's the point I'll stop. To stop while it's still fun
Yeah.
has been something that I've needed to practice
Yes.
with
Yes.
food, and it's only because having this problem made me or forced me to put so much attention into it, but I'll easily get carried away in other situations as well.
Yeah, that reminds me of a post I did recently where I said, I used to truly feel like having a little of something was so much worse than just not having any. I'd rather have none unless I could have so much. It was one or the other. That middle ground was horrible. It was like so boring and such a letdown. It was like just then why bother? I'd rather have the thrill of not having any or the thrill of having it all.
I think I'm still like that with some things. When you're saying that, I'm thinking there's a few areas of my life that could maybe do with a
Oh,
bit of
areas of
attention.
life? Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with areas of life.
Mhm.
Food has changed, but sometimes it's just so much easier to be black and white.
I know, right? At least then you know.
Exactly. It's very clear.
Yeah. And also if you wait till you're miserable before you stop doing something, then you know that you didn't miss out on any potential pleasure.
Wait, say that again.
So if you like with food or anything else you might do, if you do it to the point where you're miserable and fed up, if you'd
Yeah, you
stopped
didn't.
sooner, you might have missed out on some potential
Yeah.
enjoyment, fun, whatever it might be. So got to really exhaust that, really flog that horse till it's dead. That's not a nice analogy, but
I didn't think about it until you said it. What food do you love too much?
I don't know that there's any the f- that question doesn't really land because I don't know. I don't think of it as being about the food so much.
Mm.
So I don't feel like there is a food where I think I like this food too much.
Do you love is there a food you like so much?
I tend to go from thing to thing very quickly. So, previously I've spoken about cinnamon slices. I haven't had one for, I don't know when, months, maybe. I don't even know if I've had one this year because that's gone. But if you'd asked me about that 6 months ago, I might have said,
Mm.
oh, those cinnamon slices are the best.
Yeah.
So at the moment, what am I into?
Wait, can I ask a question then?
Yeah.
What, for the benefit of those who might be thinking, well, how did you ever, if you loved them so much, why did you stop eating them?
I still got fed up with them
Okay.
because I was probably having, at one point, probably having one or two a week.
Hmm.
And so it just got to a point where and this is what I do with a lot of foods. I just go through phases with food. And
So,
there was,
so they stopped being as enjoyable?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I eat them to the point that I get fed up. So that's
Got it.
exactly like, this is the kind of pattern that we're talking about. There was one week, the other week, where 3 nights that week, I went to M&S and I bought their pesto pasta and then their packet of prawns with the Thousand Island sauce. And there was something about that combination of those two things
Mm.
that there was the tangy sweetness of the Thousand Island sauce. There was the cold prawns and the pasta was cold as well. And it
Mm.
was just this little cold meal, but I really craved it and I have no idea why. And then I had it 3 times that week. And now the thought of it, I'm just like, oh, don't think I'm going to have that for a while.
So there's foods that like you almost habituate to that way. You're like, okay, it wears itself out. But are there any foods in your life where it doesn't? Because for me, there is. Like where you won't get sick of it by having it. Like you could have it every day and never get sick of it.
I don't think so. I don't
Mm.
think so. There hasn't been a food yet. I'll go to the shop and I'll see a food that was perhaps one of my binge foods, and I would have binged on that food several times a week for months before it's like, oh, no, thank you. A little bit like with the
So-
custard creams, we spoke about in our video.
See, those I could get tired of because I'm about to say it. There's something so sweet about them that I think after a while I'd be like, bleh. Like in my stomach, it would be like, bleh. Not in my mouth, but in my stomach. But ice cream and granola for me are two foods that I could have for probably breakfast, lunch, and dinner and never get tired of. Maybe not breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I've never tried it. So to be fair, maybe there is a point of like there's a threshold, but I could certainly have those foods every day and not get tired of them, which then invites the question like that's where that taste hunger conversation comes up because it is more a matter of that taste hunger never dies for me. But that doesn't mean I have to only listen to my taste hunger. And that is a muscle that I sort of learned to flex because I think intuitive eating would have you assume that at some point eating that enough would make you not really even want it anymore necessarily or not need to have it every day. Need is a different word. And that happened for me with a lot of foods. But with those, no. I feel like I could still be eating them every day. But it became like, okay, I could understand the taste appeal will just kind of always exist. But that doesn't mean I don't want to either feel compelled either. So like the part of food freedom that I had to work on is also feeling free that I don't have to have it just because it tastes good. Like I want the freedom to say, yes, that would taste good to me every single day, but I don't want to feel like I have to have it for that reason every single day.
Well, I think Janine Ross talks about doing that with ice cream, doesn't she? For maybe a couple of weeks or something, all she ate was ice cream. And as part of a habituation thing to get used to it. So do you want to give it a go? Just granola and ice cream and see how you go?
I can tell you that this is a fantastic assignment, but like I would just love it. I would just love it. And then, but see, the thing is, I would start to crave other things. Even psychologically, I think it'd be like, I still would love it so much, but it would just feel like, I think there'd be a part of me that feels like this is too much. I don't want to have ice cream every day. It's too much ice cream. And there would be that sort of mental, it's not restriction. It would be so that mental part that comes in being like, I don't know that it's great for me to have only ice cream every day. I think I need more in my life than that, just from a basic nutritional wisdom standpoint. So I would want to have other things for that reason. But it's not that I would but those reasons matter. You know what I mean? I think that it's this idea that just because we would have something that we should.
Yeah.
What?
Sorry, she got really passionate then. Said, those things matter. I'm like, I know, Steph. I know. It's okay. We're on the same page.
Do you know what?
What?
I have been listening to the podcasts and there are times where I'm like, I annoy myself with the level of intensity with which I speak sometimes. And I realized that it's because when I was in my house growing up, like you had to fight to speak. Like if you didn't get your message through quickly and right away and loudly, you were overruled because everyone else was louder and faster. And that's how I still speak. And that's why I do that you're certainly not putting me under any pressure to get it in right away, but that is how I am. And that's why. And I feel really glad to know it because it has really helped me have a little compassion for why I'm like that.
But I enjoy it. I think it's part of the energy of the podcast. I think if we're always at the same level, we talked about the importance of variety, right?
That's right.
Same with podcasts as it is with
sometimes
food.
you just too much ice cream.
And that's what I come in. I'm the granola. The crumbly, dry granola. Anyway. Wow. Okay, I'm going to go and finish packing. And I will be seeing you in a couple of weeks then.
Okay, I'm going to go pee.
Okay.
All
Bye.
Right. Bye.